Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to have you here. My name is Matthew Vraw, physical therapist with OPTP, and we have an exciting guest today, Lori Mize, who's been a therapist specializing in pelvic health for over 20 years. She's been doing some stuff internationally. She's done some stuff academically. She's worked with the academies. So she is, I am just so impressed by what she knows, how she knows it, where she's involved, all her little figures that she's got involved in aspects of PT and pelvic health. Lori, welcome to the Next Level interview. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for just inviting me. And I'm just really excited to talk with you guys today.
Awesome, awesome. Well, as we have you here, we usually start off by asking you, tell us about yourself. Tell us about how you got into this field. Tell us a little bit how you got into PT and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, my name's Lori Mize, and I live in a small town in rural Arkansas. And I've been a physical therapist for over 20 years and have been practicing to some degree in women's health and pelvic health, because that's what we called it, back in our day, was women's health. And so I've been practicing that since I graduated. So I got a good story about how I got into this field, because most people want to know. But I have really been interested in promoting this field since I got out of high school, and I wanted to be a physical therapist. Really, I think I decided whenever I was in the 5th grade. So I was I think I saw my great grandfather in rehab after he had a stroke. And I think I just said, I'm going to do this. And then by 7th grade, I was like, this is what I'm doing. And so all through high school, that was my plan, was to be a physical therapist. And I was an athlete. And so I kind of thought, this is what I want to do. And then got into PT school, and we got pregnant with our 2nd child, which I don't recommend doing, students, but we can do hard things. And so I learned that, right? And had horrible pelvic girdle pain. And back in the day, and back in Arkansas, no one really knew what to do with me. No one wanted to touch me. I mean, there was definitely a fear factor because I was pregnant. And as students, we had been to the National Student Conclave. The APTA used to host that event for students, and we heard someone speak about women's health. And we got together and we brought her in to come and teach us a class, because all we received education-wise at the time was, here's an article, read this article and answer these questions. And I do believe that our ortho professor just gave everyone 100 on that. And that was it. We didn't even cover it, pelvis and perineum and gross anatomy. It was like the non-existent spec, right? It did not exist. I know. Don't tell me. And so there was like this passion of like, wait, we've got to learn about this, because the speaker was amazing. And so when she came in to teach a class, I was 36 weeks pregnant, and I'd been having horrible pelvic girdle pain. I would step off of a curb at my, clinical internship at a major hospital here in Arkansas, and I would fall like at 8 months pregnant, which is not a good thing to do, right? So she came in, did some manual work, talked about the connection with everything. I felt better those last 3 weeks of my pregnancy than I had early on. And I just, from that point on, my focus shifted from sports medicine to pelvic health, because my OB had said, oh, well, that's what happens when you're pregnant, which we all know is not true. And so I thought, I'm not ever letting anybody put up with this again. And so I kind of drugged myself reluctantly to the pelvic floor course, because, growing up, we didn't talk about anything in my house. At all. And so I really was very anxious about coming to a level 1 course, but I knew that it was what was needed. And, by the end of the course, it was like, okay, I feel fine. This is it. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so it's just been that way ever since. So I kind of grew in my career to only pelvic health. I started a clinical practice, the first one in Conway, Arkansas. I was the first WCS in Arkansas, and, kind of grew a practice there. And it's growing and thriving today. I'm not involved in that, but I just absolutely love that. So went into academia full time in 2014. And I've been doing that kind of for the last 10 years. So I taught in Virginia at the University of Lynchburg, and then I moved back home to teach at the University of Central Arkansas. And now I'm teaching with the University of Utah in their hybrid DPT program. So I love that. I love students. I've been teaching in pelvic health since 2011, taught with the Academy of Pelvic Health. I served on the board of directors for the Academy of Pelvic Health for years and helped develop their curriculum, and did a ton of committee work with that and international work. And now I am teaching with Evidence in Motion and also a faculty member with Pelvic Health Korea. So I'm helping develop curriculum for them and other Asian countries to help advocate for more autonomy in pelvic health physical therapy in Asian countries. I'm involved in research, so I do a lot of research in post-hysterectomy rehabilitation and doing that in partnership with ATI Physical Therapy. So I'm pretty busy.
Wow, I'm surprised we got some time for you and I to sit down and talk about this. I mean, you are just a very busy person, but what an amazing story that, I mean, what really drew you to this was that you were a patient of this. So you were one of those forgotten people that just get kind of pushed aside by their OB or their family doc, and that's expected with pregnancy, and just pushed away. And now you've seen the light, and having somebody touch you and like, no, it doesn't have to be this way. And
Right.
I think that those are some of the most powerful stories that I have with that. But I am going to ask, because you can't use yourself always as a story. What would you say the most powerful patient success story has been for you, and where you really made that significant impact? And, how did you educate? How did you work with that person?
Sure. I love this story. It's my favorite one to tell. So when I was in full-time clinical practice in pelvic health, I had a patient come in to see me who was referred for pelvic pain and sexual dysfunction. And when I began talking with her, she'd been married for 10 years and had never been able to have penetrative intercourse. And I mean, that's a very long time.
Yeah.
And and my initial thought was, why hadn't you said something? And she finally said something to her OB because she wanted to have a baby and was not able, and she wanted to know options. And so her OB sent her to me. And, we did a ton of education, and, it was really something that we took very slow. And I explained to her that she's not alone. She is not, this is not something that she's going to have to deal with for the rest of her life. There's just a lot of empowering education about her body. And that's the thing. I want to pause here for a minute and just put a pin in this, because, being someone from the Deep South, grew up in a very conservative environment. And, that's where I live now. And there's so much freedom in educating someone about their body, about normal anatomical terminology, about just how the body functions, what to expect, what not to expect. There's such power in that. And I really feel I see that still today in just the power in education. And so we did a lot of that and started working with her. And by the time she left, I think I saw her for like 10 visits or something like that. And by the time she left, she was having pain-free intercourse. And that is like, celebratory dance in the clinic, right? I mean, everybody's just so excited. Well, her husband sent me flowers. And so, I got to call my husband and say, honey, I got flowers from another man today. And, and he was like bristling, right? Like, what do you mean you got flowers from another man? And I was like, well, it was a husband of one of my patients. And then, without giving him any information, I was like, 10 years. And he finally figured out, oh, okay. And he was like, flowers? I'd have sent you a car. That's what he said. And so we just, that's kind of a fun little story in our family. But what's neat about this patient is that she returned to see me after, when she was pregnant with her second child, which that was the goal, right? Because she was having pelvic girdle pain. And so it was just like this beautiful, kind of full circle moment, and just a beautiful example of how pelvic health physical therapy can intervene in multiple ways. And, I think we all need a pelvic health physical therapist in our, we all need a therapist, right? And so it was just, I think that's my favorite story.
Well, that hits me on so many levels about you helping to destigmatize, pelvic health. I think that's what stops a lot of people from going into seeing their therapist or their OB or their family doc about these problems, that they're there. Just no one is willing to ask the questions, or the patient doesn't even know that we can even do anything. I mean, seeing patients like, hey, we should probably, and they're like, there's a therapist for that? It's kind of like, well, is there an app for that? Well, no, but we have a therapist for that who can help with these things. And that's what we need to get you into. So I commend you with all the destigmatizing and the advocacy that you're doing, not only in this country, but outside, is, so empowering. That's such a great thing to hear. So awesome job. I give you some props for that there. As we want to kind of ask you a couple questions about, how do you incorporate rehab tools with patients experiencing pelvic pain? Because I know that there's a lot of them out there. And, I've recommended some before. I've done some pelvic, within the scope of what I see, but most of them, it's like, okay, I can treat you for a visit on this, but we need to get to somebody who has specialized, because I foresee that there being internal stuff. But
Sure.
what things are you seeing, or to enhance treatment strategies or help clinicians take care of these patients who have this stigmatizing problem and that really need our help?
Yeah. I think as far as tools in pelvic health physical therapy, particularly for pelvic pain, there are a lot of kind of internal wands that have the curvature that allow kind of internal soft tissue mobilization. And, I recommend those quite often. I also recommend like the vaginal trainers, vaginal dilators for patients to do perform graded exposure to return to, some type of penetrative activity, sexual activity. And so those things are something that I interact with all the time. But other things, particularly from OPTP, that I think are really helpful are some of the massage therapy balls, the manual therapy balls, like the Pinky balls and the Franklin balls, are really helpful for kind of soft tissue mobilization and mobilization techniques at home. So I recommend those quite often. And I love me a good foam roller. I mean, you just can't go wrong with a good foam roller for some thoracic mobility and, just some anterior lengthening and all of that. So I use a lot of those things. I will say, Matt, that, here's the thing, as a physical therapist, really, truly, and this, right? Really, the best tools that we have is our brain and our hands, and our ability to educate. And so really, truly, that's all that you need. But these other things are nice to have. They're nice for patients to be able to have something else to do at home. And, I think some of the soft tissue mobilization tools are nice to kind of help save our hands as well, so that we can practice until we, want to retire. And those things are really important too.
Yeah. Sometimes these tools and what you just talked about there really opens up the door for us to do these other important work. Sometimes with those early successes with education or a tool or hands-on, that like, oh, the patients can actually see the light at the end, that this is going to get better, and we just need to get our way of helping them to see that this isn't something that they have to suffer with for 10 years. And so you can also get that car maybe. So, maybe, but this will lead it right into the next question. So if people are coming to the EIM pelvic health courses, not to just get cars, but to learn from you about, pelvic health, and what are they going to get? What are they going to see in those first couple courses, or over the length? What are they going to be exposed to, so they feel confident that they can talk with these patients, but also treat these patients after these courses?
One of the things that I love about the Evidence in Motion coursework is they start with the orthopedic focus. And, and that's really important. So, I really think we got to get our head out of the pelvis. And so many therapists, I think, come in and take an internal course, and it's like pelvic floor. And that's, but we've got to look at the entire patient, top down, bottom up. And so I love that it starts with the orthopedic principles and connections, and how that involves pregnancy and postpartum, and how they integrate that from the very beginning. There's not an internal portion in that first class. And so I think it's really good for those who are kind of like wanting to dip their toes into pelvic health, but may have some reservations about performing the internal coursework, So that's really nice. I think it's also great too to have that hybrid option that takes place. It's a more self-paced over a cohort. So over, several weeks, 8 to 10 weeks of, weekly training. So it's not just boom one weekend or something like that, where you are sitting in front of a Zoom or where you're sitting in a class. So it makes it accessible no matter where you are. And there's also very much an emphasis in practicing your spiel. I mean, that's something that people do every week almost in these courses. They will video themselves talking about an aspect of what they're learning, and they have to kind of put together that patient spiel and practice that in an environment where they can receive feedback. And they also have to pull in evidence, not just from what's presented in the coursework where they're learning, but pull in other evidence and kind of put some things together and write out an entire treatment plan. What are you going to examine? What are you going to, how are you going to intervene? And it really emphasizes clinical reasoning in a way that I think kind of pulls everything, not just from a silo of this is what the pelvic floor is doing. So I love that about the EIM coursework. I think it's great.
Well, that's fabulous. I mean, thank you very much for that, because I think, a big hesitation for a lot of therapists, men and women getting, wanting to, they recognize the pelvic floor, the pelvic health is an area, but like, I don't want to do that because we don't talk about that. We don't, and they get all hung up about, oh, we're going to do internal work on day one. Like, so you saying that, hey, we don't cover that, we don't do that day one, and we really talk about the spiel of how to communicate, how to feel comfortable having these conversations, is something that's got to just really make the therapist who leave there feel so darn comfortable that they can do this, versus, well, here's internal work, we didn't talk about spiels, good luck. And then people get sued or something. We don't want that. So the stuff that you're really doing in that first course really opens it up for everybody who has dealing with a patient. Because last time I checked, everybody who walks into my clinic, they got a pelvic floor and stuff. So that's important for us to think about. So great. Yeah. So with your experience in the PT space, what do you think is one essential tool or technique that you believe that every PT should have in their toolkit, and why?
Yeah. So, okay. And some of this stuff obviously is not, this is expensive equipment, but I love rehab ultrasound and how it can show. You can, do a transabdominal transducer approach, and you can take a look at the pelvic floor easily, quickly, in a non-invasive way, and show a patient, what happens whenever they're contracting and relaxing. You can, look at obliques and transverse abdominis, and you can really tell a lot about that inner core, anticipatory core function with a rehab ultrasound. And I think it's really a neat aspect of what we're doing. I do love kind of the visual. I'm a visual person, so that's my bias. Okay. But I do love some of the biofeedback equipment. And I just want to give this caveat that the longer I've been practicing, the less of this stuff I use. But so I think it's helpful for an early provider to have some of these tools, just because it kind of helps to, oh yeah, that is what I felt. Oh, okay. All right. And it kind of gives you that confidence that what you were feeling is correct. But I do love, a biofeedback that will show a visual screen or some sort of a visual imagery for the patient. I think it can really help solidify some of the concepts that we're trying to teach them whenever it comes to pelvic floor muscle training. So I think those tools are probably some of the quintessential, things for pelvic health. But again, brain and hands. Yeah. And what I mean with brain, really, I think the most essential tool is education. Yeah. That's the most essential tool, because then we can come up with and we can create things for patients who don't have the finances to be able to purchase a foam roller. We can come up with those things, and we can use our brain and our clinical reasoning to do that. So I guess I'll change my tool.
That's fine. You can change that. That I'm fully letting that one go. That's great to hear. Yeah, because I think the more we engage our own brains, and being comfortable with also asking those questions about leakage, and hey, I took a step off the curb. Well, did you have leakage with that? and
Right.
feeling comfortable with those, to just even ask those questions, to say, oh, I wonder if this person has some pelvic dysfunction in addition to their hip pain, or maybe that's causing the hip pain, or the hip pain's causing that, or the low back. There's so many joints and, anatomy right in there, that any one of them can influence the other with that
Yep.
regional interdependence approach. So I'm excited that you were able to spend time with me today talking about this, and talking to our people who are going to watch this. I'm so excited about what EIM is doing in this space, and you are doing in this space, not only to educate us clinicians who need to remember that these people are out there, that they're oftentimes being overlooked or shunned away and not talked about. And these things can go on for years, like, you're a patient there for having it for 10 years, but also the space that you are working outside of just working with patients, working with the academy, working outside of the country to help educate, is fabulous work. So, Lori, I so much appreciate this time. It has been a blast talking to you. With that, we'll call it a day, but thank you very much for your time and with this group and talking about the next level aspects. You all have a great rest of the day. Everybody else, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you out there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.